There's a billboard on Highway 47 inches northern Wisconsin. Time and weather have faded it nearly beyond recognition, but if you look closely, you can still make out a woman's face. Her name is Susan Poupart, and for over 3 decades, she's been waiting for someone to tell the truth about what happened on a dark May morning in 1990. This is a story about the details we overlook, the small moments that, in hindsight, scream for our attention, the witnesses who saw but didn't speak, the evidence that survived against impossible odds, and the children who grew up in the shadow of a mother they barely remember. Because sometimes, in cold cases, it's not what's missing that solves the mystery, it's what's been there all along, hiding in plain sight. I'm your host, and this is Cold Case Grim Files. November 12, 1960. Susan Poupart was born into the Lac du Flambeau band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians, a small tribal community of about 2,500 people tucked into the northern Wisconsin wilderness. To know Susan, or Susie, as everyone called her, you have to understand that in places like Lac du Flambeau, everyone knows everyone. Your neighbors are your cousins. Your friends are your family. And secrets? Well, secrets have a way of spreading like wildfire through the pines. But they also have a way of being kept. The Lac du Flambeau Reservation sits in Vilas County, in the heart of Wisconsin's Northwoods. It's a place of extraordinary natural beauty, pristine lakes, dense forests of pine and birch, land that has belonged to the Ojibwe people for centuries before Wisconsin became a state. The name Lac du Flambeau comes from the French Lake of Torches, named for the traditional Ojibwe practice of night fishing by torchlight. This is an important context because Susan wasn't just a woman from Wisconsin. She was Anishinaabe, a member of a community with deep roots, ancient traditions, and a complicated relationship with the American justice system that stretches back generations. Susan was only 29 years old in 1990, but she'd already lived a full life. She was a single mother to 2 children, 9-year-old Jared and 3-year-old Alexandria, whom everyone called Alex. Friends described Susan as beautiful, strong-willed, and fiercely protective of her kids. She had the kind of personality that filled a room outgoing, fun-loving, someone who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Her friend Ray, who knew Susan well, described her as having the sweetest demeanor, but also noted that Susan was nobody's fool. She was small but strong, the kind of woman who could hold her own in any conversation or confrontation. She didn't take anything from nobody, her son Jared would later recall. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind. But beneath that strength was a tenderness that her children remember most. Susan was the kind of mother who paid attention to details. She made sure Jared's shirts were ironed, his shoes polished. She created a sense of stability and love in a world that could often feel unstable for Native families living on reservations. Susan had artistic dreams too. She'd attended the Institute of American Indian Arts in New Mexico, a prestigious school that has trained some of the most important Native American artists of the past century. There, surrounded by other Indigenous artists and thinkers, Susan learned to work with ceramics. She created beautiful vases with traditional Ojibwe designs, sculptures that merged contemporary techniques with cultural symbolism. Her daughter Alex still has one of those pieces. It's a vase shaped like a native man wearing a headdress. Alex keeps it wrapped carefully in a handmade afghan, taking it out occasionally to hold it, to feel the smooth ceramic her mother's hands once shaped. These objects are all Alex has, fragments of a woman she barely knew but desperately wants to understand. My mother was left-handed, Alex learned from others who knew Susan. Such a small detail, but it matters. Every detail matters when you're trying to piece together the ghost of a parent. In May 1990, Susan was working as a waitress at the tribal casino, living in her own house on the reservation, and doing her best to raise her 2 children. Every morning, Jared would wake up to find his clothes laid out on the edge of his bed: buttons, shirts, dress pants, nice shoes. Susan made sure her son went to school looking sharp, no matter what. It was her way of telling him he mattered, that he deserved to hold his head high. She always dressed me up in nice clothes, Jared remembered. That's how she'd send me to school every day. Before Susan went out that night, she'd made arrangements for her children. They were staying with her sister, safe and cared for. This is something investigators always emphasize. Susan was a responsible mother. She didn't just take off without ensuring her kids were looked after. She planned. She checked in. She was present. Susan loved her children. This is important to remember, because when she left for a party on the night of May 20, 1990, everyone who knew her understood one undeniable truth: Susan Poupart would never abandon her kids. Never. Whatever happened that night, Susan didn't walk away from her life. Someone took it from her. The party that night was on Makwa Trail, just about a mile south of Susan's home on Little Pines Road. It was an after-bar party, the kind that starts when the bars close and extends into the early morning hours. A young man from the community was heading off to military service, and friends gathered to give him a proper send-off. Susan arrived at some point during the evening. Multiple witnesses would later report seeing her at the party, socializing, having a good time. This was Susan being Susan, enjoying life, spending time with friends. Her children were safe, staying with her sister. She'd check in with them in the morning like she always did. Except this time, morning never came. Around 4 a.m., on May 20, 1990, Susan decided it was time to go home. The party was winding down. She needed to get back to her kids. She'd call them in the morning, check in with her sister, make sure everything was okay. That's what mothers do. That's what Susan always did. The party that night had been typical for Lac du Flambeau, an intimate gathering on Makwa Trail, the kind of after-hours event that starts when the bars close and extends into the early morning. Music played. People talked and laughed. Drinks were passed around. It was a send-off for a young man heading to military service, a bittersweet celebration of someone leaving the community to serve their country. Susan knew most of the people there. In a community of 2,500, you don't go to parties with strangers. These were neighbors, relatives, friends of friends. The faces were familiar. The surroundings were comfortable. There was no reason for Susan to feel unsafe. Until there was. What happened next is where the story fractures into different versions, each one told by someone with something to hide or something to fear. Multiple witnesses at the party saw Susan leave. They saw her approach or be approached by a Buick sedan. The car belonged to Robert Elm, a local man with a reputation in the community. Joseph Cobb was with him. Both were known figures on the reservation, not strangers, not outsiders, but men who lived and worked in Lac du Flambeau. According to most accounts, Susan got into the car willingly. The men had offered her a ride home, a simple act of kindness, or so it seemed. After all, it was 4 a.m. The night was dark. Susan lived about a mile away. Who wouldn't accept a ride from people they knew? But at least one witness would later tell police something different, something that should have set off every alarm bell. This witness claimed Susan was being forced into the vehicle. The witness saw struggle, saw resistance, saw something that didn't look like a friendly offer of a ride but rather coercion. Let me pause here, because this detail, this single observation, is one of those overlooked moments that haunts this case. One witness saw coercion, Others saw cooperation. But here's the thing about late-night parties where alcohol has been flowing for hours. People's memories get fuzzy. Their observations become unreliable. Witnesses see what they expect to see or what they want to remember. And in the crucial hours that followed, that ambiguity would give two men just enough cover to tell their story their way. The Buick pulled away from the party on Makwa Trail with Susan Poupart inside. She was never seen alive again. Now, let's think about Susan's state of mind in that moment. She was a mother eager to get home. She'd been out having fun, but her children were always on her mind. If someone offered her a ride, she'd probably be grateful. But if that same ride started heading in the wrong direction, if the conversation turned dark, if she realized too late that these men had other intentions, what could she do? She was small. They were two grown men. She was in a moving vehicle. Even if she screamed, who would hear her at 4 a.m. on empty reservation roads? Whatever happened in that car, Susan fought. We know this from the evidence that would later be found. Susan didn't go quietly. She resisted. And that resistance may have been what sealed her fate. Here's where another overlooked detail becomes critical. Susan wasn't reported missing for at least 2 days. 2 full days. Now, before you judge her family, you need to understand the context. Susan was 29 years old, an independent adult. She was known to sometimes stay with friends in other parts of Wisconsin, central Wisconsin, down south near Madison. She had a life beyond the reservation. So, when she didn't come home immediately, her family assumed she'd made other plans, that she'd crashed at a friend's place, that she'd call when she could. This wasn't negligence. This was the reality of Susan's life and the trust her family had in her ability to take care of herself. But it was also, unfortunately, a gift of time to whoever had harmed her. Sheriff Joe Fath, who would later take charge of the investigation, explained that this delay was typical for the reservation. Nobody got worried until she didn't call home or check because she had her kids staying with her sister, Sheriff Fath said, and nobody had heard from her. And that's what alerted them. That phone call that never came, that check-in that never happened, that's when alarm bells started ringing. Because Susan always called. Susan always checked on her children. And when she didn't, when silence stretched from hours into days, her family knew something was terribly wrong. But those 2 days mattered. Evidence degrades quickly in May in Wisconsin. The weather turns warm and humid. Rain falls. Animals are active scavenging, disturbing scenes. Forensic evidence that might have been preserved if found immediately can be contaminated or destroyed within 48 hours. Those 2 days gave whoever harmed Susan precious time. Time to clean up evidence. Time to dispose of anything incriminating. Time to coordinate stories. Time to make sure the body was hidden where it might never be found. When Susan's family finally reported her missing on May 22, the Vilas County Sheriff's Office responded immediately. You see, in 1990, Lac du Flambeau didn't have its own tribal police department. The county handled all law enforcement on the reservation, a fact that would become significant as the investigation unfolded. Deputies and fire department personnel fanned out across the community, conducting ground searches for 4 to 5 days. They combed through wooded areas near Susan's home, near the party location, along roads where she might have walked. They were searching for a living woman, hoping against hope to find her before it was too late. The community rallied. Volunteers joined the search. Family members distributed flyers. Everyone wanted to find Susan alive. Everyone prayed for a miracle, that she'd wandered off disoriented, that she was injured somewhere but survivable, that this story would have a happy ending. Eventually, Specially trained tracking dogs from Minnesota were brought in. These were bloodhounds with incredible abilities to track scent trails, even days after a person had passed through an area. They found nothing. It was as if Susan Poupart had simply vanished into the Wisconsin wilderness. Before we continue with what happens next, and trust me, what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about this case, I want to take a moment to ask for your support. Here at Cold Case Grim Files, we're committed to giving voices to the forgotten, to the cases that deserve justice, but have been buried by time and indifference. Susan Poupart's story is one of thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous people whose cases remain unsolved, often because of systemic failures and community silence. If you're finding value in this investigation, if you believe these stories need to be told, please consider subscribing to our channel. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Your subscription helps us continue this work, helps us dig deeper into cases that others have forgotten, and most importantly, helps us keep pressure on law enforcement to never give up. Because that's what this is really about, never giving up on Susan, on her children, or on justice. Now, let's talk about what happened 6 months after Susan disappeared. November 22, 1990. Thanksgiving Day. While families across America were gathering around tables laden with turkey and stuffing, while the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade marched through Manhattan, while football games played on television screens, 2 hunters were walking through the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in Price County, Wisconsin. They were looking for deer. Instead, they found Susan Poupart. The location was roughly 12 miles from where Susan was last seen, but those 12 miles might as well have been 100. The hunters were navigating through a thick cedar swamp, the kind of terrain most people avoid. This wasn't a maintained trail. This wasn't a scenic hiking path that tourists stumble upon. This was deep, difficult woods. The cedar swamp was marshy, dense with brush, surrounded by trees so close together they block out most of the sunlight even at midday. The ground was uneven, treacherous with hidden holes and fallen logs. Water pooled in low spots, creating a cold, dank environment where mosquitoes swarmed in summer and ice formed in winter. This wasn't a place you stumbled upon by accident. This was deep woods. The kind of location you had to know about to find. The kind of place hunters knew because they'd walked these woods for years, tracking deer, setting up stands, learning the landscape intimately. The hunters were approximately 100 yards from a forest road, close enough that someone could drive there, walk into the woods with a burden, and return to their vehicle without being seen. Remote enough that screams wouldn't carry. Hidden enough that a body might never be found. Except the hunters came across a disturbed area. Something caught their attention, an irregularity in the landscape. A disturbance that experienced woodsmen recognize as unnatural. Underneath a log, partially concealed by debris and fallen branches, they found a purse. When they opened it, they discovered personal items, lipstick, maybe some change, the small necessities a woman carries, and a tribal identification card. The name read, Susan Poupart. Their hearts must have sunk in that moment. They'd read about the missing woman. The whole community had. For 6 months, people had wondered what happened to Susan Poupart. Now these hunters were staring at her purse in one of the most remote locations in Price County. Then they found a jacket nearby. It was underneath more debris, as if someone had tried to hide it, to bury it under branches and organic material, hoping nature would reclaim it and make it disappear. When they pulled the jacket out from under the debris, something else came with it. A human jawbone. The hunters immediately contacted authorities. This was no longer a hunting trip. This was a crime scene. The Vilas County Sheriff's Office, dispatched deputies and crime scene investigators. The Wisconsin State Crime Lab sent a field response team. This was now a recovery operation, and everyone understood the grim reality. After 6 months in the wilderness, they weren't going to find much. What they discovered painted a grim picture of Susan Poupart's final moments and the desperate attempts to hide evidence of her murder. Susan's remains were scattered across the area, likely by animal activity. Wolves, coyotes, and black bears are all common in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. These predators and scavengers would have been attracted to the decomposing remains. Over 6 months from the warm, humid days of May through the hot summer and into the cooling autumn, animals had done what animals do. The 6 months of exposure had taken their toll. Much of the skeleton was missing, including the skull. Lieutenant Carl Gauger, one of the investigators, later noted something curious. There were indications that the remains had been scattered by animals, and we didn't see that same indication in the clothing. This suggested that Susan's body had been wrapped or covered initially, protecting the clothing from animal interference, while the remains themselves were more exposed and vulnerable to predation. The forensic team worked carefully, documenting everything. They created a grid search pattern, marking and photographing every piece of evidence. The cedar environment where Susan's body was found, acidic, cool, damp, may have actually helped preserve DNA evidence better than if she'd been left in a drier, warmer location. It's one of nature's ironic twists. But the lower jawbone remained intact. Through forensic dental examination, comparing the dental records from Susan's life with the bone they'd recovered, investigators definitively identified the remains as Susan Poupart. The confirmation was both a relief and a horror. Her family finally knew what had happened to their daughter, their sister, their mother. Susan was dead. She hadn't run away. She hadn't started a new life somewhere else. She'd been murdered and left in the wilderness like garbage. They also found something else, something that transformed this from a possible accident or exposure death into a clear homicide: plastic garbage bags and duct tape. Someone had tried to hide the body, to wrap it, to seal it, to conceal it in the swamp where they hoped it would never be found. This wasn't someone panicking after an accidental death. This wasn't a hit-and-run driver fleeing the scene. This was deliberate concealment. Sheriff Fath would later describe the crime scene. "We knew from the crime scene that she was murdered. They found remnants of plastic and tape in what was part of an effort to hide her remains. The forensic analysis revealed evidence of sexual assault, the positioning of clothing, the presence of male DNA on Susan's underwear. The nature of the assault all pointed to a sexual attack. Susan had fought. The evidence suggested resistance. But ultimately, she'd been overpowered, assaulted, and murdered. The exact cause of death couldn't be determined due to the advanced decomposition and the absence of Susan's skull. Without soft tissue, without a skull to examine for trauma, the medical examiner couldn't definitively say whether Susan died from strangulation, blunt force trauma, gunshot wound, or some other means. But the manner of death was absolutely clear: homicide. Now here's an overlooked detail that's crucial to understanding this case. The location where Susan's body was found wasn't random. Investigators noted that this wasn't a place you'd find by accident. It was in a remote cedar swamp, yes, but it was approximately 100 yards from a forest road. More importantly, it was the kind of location that local hunters would know about, specifically deer hunters who were familiar with the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. This area was frequented by hunters during deer season. It was isolated enough for privacy but accessible enough to reach. Someone who hunted these woods would know exactly where to go to hide a body in a location where it might never be discovered. Remember that detail. We'll come back to it. But for now, Susan Poupart's family had to face a new reality. Their daughter, sister, and mother hadn't just disappeared. She'd been brutally murdered, hidden in the wilderness, and left to rot. And somewhere in their community, her killers were walking free, pretending to be shocked by the news, offering condolences while knowing exactly what they'd done. Robert Elm and Joseph Cobb, the two men last seen with Susan, were immediately brought in for questioning. Their story was simple, consistent, and completely illogical. They claimed they'd offered Susan a ride home. Everything was fine at first, they said, but then an argument broke out. The details of this argument remained vague. They never quite explained what the fight was about. But according to them, things got heated enough that they decided to put Susan out of the car. Where did they drop her off? In front of the old Lac du Flambeau elementary school. Now let's think about the geography for a moment. This is one of those overlooked details that should have raised immediate red flags. Susan's home was on Little Pines Road, about a mile north of the party location on Makwa Trail. If you're giving someone a ride home from that party, you turn right, head north, drop them off. Simple. The elementary school? That's half a mile south of the party in the opposite direction of Susan's house. Sheriff Fath put it plainly. It doesn't make sense when they said they were going to give her a ride home, and they went in the opposite direction. So here we have two men who claim they were doing Susan a favor by giving her a ride home, but instead of driving north toward her house, they drove south farther away from her destination than the party itself. Then, after an argument about something they can't quite explain, they dropped a young mother off alone at 4 a.m. in front of a closed school building, in the opposite direction of her home. And then, according to their story, they just went home, never saw her again, had no idea what happened to her. Does that story make sense to you? Because it didn't make sense to investigators either. As investigators dug deeper, a third name emerged. Francis Fritz Schuman, who happened to be Robert Elm's cousin. Schuman's name came up early in the investigation, mentioned by multiple people in the community who seemed to know things they weren't quite willing to say out loud. In Lac du Flambeau, information travels through whispers and rumors, passed along in quiet conversations that never quite make it to the police. Jared Poupart, Susan's son, heard these whispers growing up. Piece by piece, he assembled a horrific narrative of his mother's final hours, that she'd been the victim of an attempted sexual assault and fought back, that she'd been beaten for resisting, that she'd been gang raped, that she'd been shot and killed with the pump handle of a tire jack. But the people who told Jared these stories, they refused to go to the police. I'm not sure, but I believe there are people in that community in Lac du Flambeau that know something about this case, and they have chosen not to come forward, Jared said. This brings us to one of the most overlooked aspects of this entire investigation, the wall of silence. In tight-knit communities, especially on tribal lands, there's often a complex relationship with law enforcement. Historical trauma, distrust of outside authorities, fear of retaliation, all of these factors can create an environment where people know the truth but won't speak it. And in Susan Poupart's case, that silence has been deafening. By 2007, 17 years had passed since Susan's murder. Her children were growing up without answers. The investigation had gone cold, warming up occasionally when new tips came in, then cooling again when those tips led nowhere. The Vilas County District Attorney decided it was time to try something different. They convened a John Doe hearing, a unique Wisconsin legal proceeding where a judge can compel witness testimony to investigate whether a crime has been committed. No one gets charged in a John Doe hearing. It's purely investigative. But this wasn't the first John Doe hearing in Susan's case. It was actually the third. 2 others had been held in the early 1990s. The difference this time: the 2007 hearing would be public. The community would know who investigators believed had information they weren't sharing. 3 names were called: Robert Elm, Joseph Cobb, and Francis Schuman. Schuman showed up but offered little information. His testimony was described as unhelpful, evasive. Elm also appeared but immediately invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He refused to answer any questions. And Cobb? He didn't show up at all. Let that sink in for a moment. Here are 3 men who claim they have nothing to hide, who say they simply gave a woman a ride and dropped her off safely. Yet when called before a judge to answer questions under oath, one doesn't show up. One pleads the Fifth, and one offers nothing useful. Sheriff Fath's reaction was measured but telling. To me, it was suspicious. You know, why wouldn't you tell us the truth? Or answer the questions that the district attorney asked you? But obviously that's up to them. That's one of their rights. Here's another overlooked detail. Both Elm and Cobb have had additional run-ins with the law since 1990. Their names have appeared in other police reports, other investigations. These aren't model citizens who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But without direct evidence linking them to Susan's murder, without witnesses willing to testify, the case remained stalled. In 1990, DNA technology was in its infancy. Only large cities had the funding, equipment, and training to conduct DNA analysis. And even then, results were limited. But investigators collecting evidence from Susan's case were forward-thinking. They preserved everything they could, betting that someday technology would catch up. In 1992, evidence was sent to an FBI lab. Nothing of evidentiary value came back. But here's where the story takes an almost unbelievable turn, another one of those overlooked details that seems too bizarre to be real. Remember how I told you Elm and Cobb were deer hunters? Investigators had recovered deer hair from inside Elm's Buick, the car Susan was last seen entering. They also found deer hair at the crime scene where Susan's body was discovered. In 2003, with DNA technology improving, the sheriff's office sent those hair samples to a private lab on the Gulf Coast. The hope was that matching the deer hair from the car to the deer hair at the crime scene could definitively place Elm's vehicle at the dump site. But then Mother Nature intervened. A hurricane swept through the Gulf Coast and completely destroyed the lab. Gone. All of it. The samples, the analysis, everything. Sheriff Fath's matter-of-fact recounting captures the frustration. Unfortunately, whatever hurricane came through that year wiped out the whole lab. So we weren't able to do that. Undeterred, investigators kept trying. In 2014, more evidence was sent for DNA testing. This time, they learned something significant. Susan's underwear contained male DNA. But the sample wasn't complete enough to create a full profile that could definitively match a suspect. The cedar swamp where Susan's body was found may have actually helped preserve DNA evidence despite the 6-month exposure. Cedars create an acidic environment that can slow decomposition and DNA degradation. It's an ironic twist. The very remoteness that made it a good hiding spot also made it a poor one for destroying evidence. In August 2024, the Vilas County Sheriff's Office was awarded an $8,570 grant for additional DNA testing. It's not nearly enough. Estimates suggest they need between $25,000 and $30,000 to test everything they want to test, but it's something. The money went to test their most important and supportive evidence using new technology. In 2024, the Wausau Crime Lab employed the MVAC system, a device that works like a miniature carpet cleaner, spraying solution on evidence and sucking it back up, along with any DNA collected through a sterile filter. This method captures DNA that earlier techniques missed. However, the samples still weren't complete enough to create a full profile. In April 2025, another batch of DNA was sent for testing, using even more advanced techniques. As of this recording, those results are pending. I need to pause here again to talk directly to you wherever you're listening from. Maybe you're listening in Berlin. Maybe you're in Wisconsin. Maybe you're halfway around the world. But wherever you are, this story matters because cases like Susan Poupart's happen everywhere. Indigenous women, in particular, face disproportionate rates of violence and murder. On reservations across North America, the violent crime rate is about 2.5 times higher than the national average. And when these crimes happen, they often receive less attention, fewer resources, and less justice than cases involving non-Indigenous victims. Susan's son Jared put it bluntly, "The value of a Native American's life to the government is nothing. Look at the white women who got murdered in the surrounding communities. Their murders were solved within a matter of months." But here at Cold Case Grim Files, we believe every life has value. Every victim deserves justice. And every cold case deserves investigators, even if those investigators are just podcasters and YouTubers and listeners like you who refuse to let these stories die. So I'm asking you again, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so now. Share this episode with someone who cares about justice. Leave a comment telling us what detail in this case caught your attention. Because pressure from the public, from people who care, from communities demanding answers, that's what keeps these cases alive. And Susan Poupart's case is very much alive. Alexandria Poupart was 3 years old when her mother disappeared. Today, she's a mother herself, raising 5 boys, 5 lives that Susan Poupart will never know. 5 grandchildren who will only know their grandmother through stories and photographs, and that ceramic vase wrapped in an Afghan. Alex doesn't remember much about Susan. How could she? 3-year-olds don't form the kind of lasting memories that sustain you through decades. What Alex has instead are fragments, sensory impressions that surface like dreams, moments that might be memories or might just be wishful imagination. She remembers or thinks she remembers soft hands, a voice, the feeling of being held. But are these actual memories, or just the echoes of stories other people told her? Images from photographs that have become part of her internal narrative. "I had dreams about her that I think were memories," Alex told investigators. "Maybe it could have been a memory of when I was little." It's heartbreaking, this uncertainty. To not even be sure if your memories of your mother are real or fabricated by a mind desperate to hold on to something. Anything. Alex has had to piece together who her mother was from stories told by others. From photographs that capture frozen moments of a life cut short. From that ceramic vase her mother created, smooth, beautiful, crafted by hands Alex can barely remember. The vase sits wrapped in a handmade Afghan in Alex's home. She takes it out sometimes, carefully unwraps it, holds it in her own hands. This object, clay-shaped and fired and glazed by Susan Poupart, is one of the few tangible connections Alex has to her mother. It's more than art. It's evidence that Susan existed, that she had talent and dreams and the ability to create beautiful things. Alex learned other details over the years. Her mother was left-handed. Such a small thing, but it mattered to Alex. It made Susan more real, more three-dimensional. Her mother attended art school in New Mexico. Her mother was strong and outgoing. Her mother loved her children fiercely. Every detail helped fill in the outline of a woman Alex desperately wanted to know. But Alex lives with daily reminders that aren't comforting, they're haunting. Her home is just 3 doors down from the house on Makwa Trail, where the party was held, where her mother was last seen alive. Every time Alex leaves her house, she passes that location. Every time she drives through the neighborhood, she sees the place where Susan got into that Buick and disappeared forever. Where she got abducted from is right down the road from my house, Alex said. It's like 3 doors down. I live on the same street the place she was last seen. Think about that for a moment. Imagine living your entire adult life just 3 doors away from the spot where your mother was murdered. Imagine raising your children on the same street where your own mother vanished. Imagine the psychological weight of that proximity, the constant reminder that evil happened right there, and the people responsible might still be walking the same streets. Alex likely sees them. The people who were at that party. The people who know what happened, but won't speak. Maybe even the men responsible for her mother's death. In a community of 2,500 people, you can't avoid anyone. You see them at the gas station, at the grocery store, at community events. And then there's the billboard on Highway 47, the one with Susan's faded face staring out at passing traffic, begging for information, refusing to be forgotten. Alex's own children have seen it. Her 12-year-old son, her 10-year-old, her younger boys, they've all caught glimpses of their grandmother's face on that weathered billboard. My oldest is 12, and my other one is 10. And there's a billboard of my mom on the highway, Alex said. I would try to distract them from seeing it as they drove past, but they've caught a glimpse a few times. How do you explain that to your children? How do you tell them that the grandmother they never met is on a billboard because someone murdered her and got away with it? That the justice system failed her? That despite decades of investigation, no one has been held accountable? These conversations have happened in Alex's home. They'll continue to happen as her younger children get older and start asking questions. People often tell Alex she looks just like her mother. The resemblance is striking enough that it stops people in their tracks. Sometimes they get teary-eyed when they see her. Sometimes they can't look at her directly because seeing Susan's face on Alex's features is too painful, too much of a reminder of what was lost. I am the spitting age of my mom. Sometimes when I talk to people, they get all teary-eyed and tear up and, won't look at me, Alex said. Sometimes it just gets to me, emotionally. Alex tries her best to shield her own children from the pain she felt growing up. She wants them to have stable, normal childhoods, the kind of childhood she lost when Susan disappeared. But how do you shield children from a tragedy that's literally advertised on a billboard? How do you protect them from the reality that their family was torn apart by violence? Her brother Jared carries his trauma differently. Jared was 9 when their mother disappeared, old enough to remember her clearly, old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, old enough to feel the full weight of that loss. He remembers that last morning. He remembers his clothes laid out on the edge of his bed, as always, Susan's ritual, her way of showing love through small acts of care. He remembers going to school in his buttoned shirt and dress pants and nice shoes. He remembers coming home to confusion and questions and then, eventually, the horrible news. An uncle told him his mother wasn't coming home. Jared refused to believe it at first. How could he? He was 9 years old. His mother had been there that morning. She'd laid out his clothes. She was coming back. Except she wasn't. Later, police showed him her purse and a necklace they'd found with her remains, wanting him to identify them as hers. But Jared was just a child. He didn't understand what they were asking, didn't comprehend the finality of what had happened. He was real hurt as a boy, Alex recalled. That hurt never really went away. It transformed into anger, frustration, and a deep cynicism about justice. Jared is angry. He's frustrated with the justice system he believes failed his mother because she was Native American. He's watched as murders of white women in surrounding communities were solved within months, while his mother's case remained unsolved for decades. The value of a Native American's life to the government is nothing, Jared said. Look at the white women who got murdered in the surrounding communities. Their murders were solved within a matter of months. He's not wrong to feel this way. Statistics support his perception. The violent crime rate on reservations is about 2.5 times higher than the national average. Yet the U.S. Department of Justice files charges in only about half of murder cases that occur on Indian lands. Missing and murdered Indigenous people, particularly women, face systemic failures in investigation and prosecution. But Jared's anger goes beyond statistics. It's personal. It's about 3 specific men who, in his mind, destroyed his family and faced no consequences. They've all had a life with their children, Jared said bitterly. Me and my sister, we had that taken away. Robert Elm, Joseph Cobb, Francis Schuman, these 3 names have haunted Jared for 35 years. They're the men he believes killed his mother. And they've lived their lives freely while Jared and Alex grew up without their mom. Jared has cobbled together a horrific narrative of his mother's final hours through rumors and whispers, that after she was taken from the party, she was the victim of an attempted sexual assault. That she fought back because Susan Poupart didn't go down without a fight. That she was beaten for resisting. That she was gang raped. That she was killed with the pump handle of a tire jack. These details, true or not, have lived in Jared's head for decades. He can't verify them because the people who told him these stories refused to go to the police. I'm not sure, but I believe there are people in that community in Lac du Flambeau that know something about this case, and they have chosen not to come forward, Jared said. This is what living with unsolved murder does to families. It traps them in a perpetual state of grief and anger and unresolved trauma. There's no closure. There's no justice. There's just the endless weight of knowing that someone got away with it. In 2024, Alex launched a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for additional DNA testing and familial genealogy analysis. She's fighting for her mother in a way she never could as a 3-year-old child who didn't understand why mommy wasn't coming home. The fundraising description is simple and heartbreaking. My name is Alex Poupart, and my mother's name was Susan Poupart. She disappeared in May of 1990 and was found deceased 6 months later. Vilas County Police collected limited evidence at the scene, and some evidence was sent out for DNA testing with no results. The police have a few more items that need to be tested that haven't been tested yet. I am humbly asking any that may be able to help. This is what children of cold case victims do. They grow up, they become adults, and they take on the fight for justice that should have been won decades ago. Alex and Jared represent thousands of other children who've lost parents to unsolved murders, particularly Indigenous children who've lost mothers to the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. They grow up in the shadows of billboards and unanswered questions. They raise their own children while carrying the weight of unresolved grief. And they wait. They hope. They never stop seeking answers. Let's circle back to those overlooked details I mentioned at the beginning. Because when you lay them all out, they create a picture that's hard to ignore. Detail number 1. The witness who said Susan was forced into the car. This testimony seems to have been minimized over the years, overshadowed by other witnesses who said she got in willingly. But what if that one witness was right? What if Susan was coerced from the very beginning? Detail number 2. The direction the car was traveling. Elm and Cobb say they were taking Susan home but drove south instead of north, away from her house instead of toward it. This isn't a small mistake. In a community as small as Lac du Flambeau, everyone knows where everyone lives. These men would have known where Susan lived. So why drive the wrong direction? Detail number 3. The elementary school drop-off location. Even if we accept their story, that they got into an argument and decided to put her out of the car, why drop her at a closed school building, alone at 4 a.m., farther from her home than where you picked her up? It's not just illogical, it's suspicious. Detail number 4. The location of the body. The thick cedar swamp, 100 yards from a forest road, in an area known to local hunters. Whoever dumped Susan's body knew that location. They knew how to get there. They knew it was remote enough that the body might never be found. The body was discovered during deer hunting season by deer hunters, and both Elm and Cobb were known deer hunters. Detail number 5. The attempted concealment. The garbage bags, the duct tape, the effort to hide the remains. This wasn't someone panicking and fleeing the scene. This was someone taking time to try to conceal evidence, someone who believed they could get away with it. Detail number 6. The deer hair. Before the hurricane destroyed the evidence, investigators were pursuing a theory that the deer hair in Elm's car might match deer hair at the crime scene. Why would deer hair at a crime scene be significant? Because it could prove that the vehicle had been driven to that specific hunting area in the forest. Detail number 7. The Fifth Amendment and the no-shows. In the 2007 John Doe hearing, the behavior of all 3 persons of interest was consistent with people who had something to hide. If you're innocent, if you simply gave someone a ride and dropped them off safely, why not tell your story under oath? Detail number 8. The community silence. This is perhaps the most telling detail of all. In a community of 2,500 people where everyone knows everyone, where rumors spread like wildfire, the fact that so many people seem to know something but won't tell investigators speaks volumes. Is it fear, loyalty, or something else? Detail number 9. The 2-day delay in reporting. While understandable given Susan's independent nature, those 2 days gave the perpetrators precious time to clean up evidence, to get their stories straight, to make sure the body was hidden where it might never be found. Detail number 10. The male DNA on Susan's underwear. Coupled with evidence of sexual assault, this DNA could be the key to solving the case if a complete profile can be developed and matched to a suspect. When you consider all of these details together, the picture becomes clearer. This wasn't a random crime. This wasn't a stranger abduction. This was someone or multiple someones from the community who knew Susan, who knew the area, who knew how to hide a body, and who believed they could get away with murder. And for 35 years, they have. That billboard on Highway 47 has been standing for more than a decade. Time and weather have faded it so badly that you can barely make out Susan's face anymore. But it's still there, a ghostly reminder that glows white in the moonlight, watching over the road between the reservation and the town of Minocqua. It's an unavoidable daily reminder for anyone who lives in or travels through Lac du Flambeau. That means Robert Elm sees it, Joseph Cobb sees it, Francis Schuman sees it. Every witness from that party, every person who heard a rumor or knows a secret, they all see it. Sheriff Fath told investigators, they see her face every time they come into Lac du Flambeau. The intention is clear. Don't let anyone forget. Don't let this case fade into obscurity. Keep the pressure on. And there are signs that pressure is building. In May 2025, the Lac du Flambeau Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, announced they were offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction in Susan's murder. This is in addition to earlier reward offers and fundraising efforts. The tribe's statement was powerful. It goes without saying that Poupart's children, now grown, deserve answers in the death of their mother, who was so cruelly taken from them. The Lac du Flambeau tribal community, too, deserves to know what happened to one of their own. Most important, Poupart deserves justice. She was only 29 years old when she was murdered. She had her whole life in front of her, and her two beloved children to raise. Her killers must answer for their crime, so that Susie can finally rest in peace, and her family and community can begin to heal. The case has also received assistance from an unexpected source. Ron Carlson, a retired bush pilot and YouTube creator who runs a channel called Faces of the Forgotten. Carlson visits cemeteries across the country, telling stories of people whose cases have been forgotten. When he visited Susan's grave in 2024, he pledged $10,000 of his own money and fundraising from his subscribers toward DNA testing and familial genealogy analysis. I really wanted to see if that could drive a little more and help, because time is ticking, Carlson said. I want to see the killers caught. Detective Cody Remick, who was assigned to the case in recent years, has also brought new energy to the investigation. The Vilas County Sheriff's Office is now working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Justice Services Missing and Murdered Unit. Additional resources and expertise focus specifically on Indigenous victims. And that DNA evidence currently being tested? The technology available today is light years ahead of what existed in 1990 or even 2014. Advances in DNA extraction, analysis, and genealogical matching have solved cold cases that seemed impossible just a few years ago. There's hope, real hope. But hope requires something else: witnesses willing to speak. Here's what we know for certain. On May 20, 1990, at approximately 4 a.m., Susie Poupart left a party on Makwa Trail in Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin. She got into a Buick sedan with two men, Robert Elm and Joseph Cobb. She was never seen alive again. 6 months later, her partial remains were discovered in a remote cedar swamp in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, wrapped in plastic and duct tape. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. Despite thousands of hours of investigation, hundreds of interviews, multiple John Doe hearings, and decades of pursuing leads, no one has been charged with her murder. 3 men remain persons of interest: Robert Elm, Joseph Cobb, and Francis Schuman. All 3 still live in the area. All 3 have refused to provide information that would eliminate them as suspects. And somewhere in Lac du Flambeau, people know what happened that night. They know the truth. But they've chosen silence over justice. This case isn't unsolvable. It's being hidden by silence. The overlooked details are there. The physical evidence exists. The DNA is being tested. The investigation is active. What's missing are voices, people willing to step forward and tell the truth. If you're listening to this and you know something about Susan Poupart's murder, I'm begging you to call the Vilas County Sheriff's Office at 715-479-4441. You can also contact the Wisconsin Department of Justice at 608-266-1221 or the Lac du Flambeau Tribal Police Department at 715-588-7717. There's a $25,000 reward, and you can leave anonymous tips through the Tip 411 system. Susan's children deserve answers. Her grandchildren deserve to know their grandmother's killers were held accountable. And Susan, who loved her children fiercely, who made sure they had clothes laid out every morning, who created beautiful art and had dreams of her own, deserves justice. The billboard may be faded, but the case isn't. Technology is improving. Pressure is building. And sometimes, all it takes is one person deciding that silence isn't worth carrying anymore. Sometimes the smallest overlooked detail, a whispered conversation, a conscience finally speaking up, a moment of courage is all that stands between a cold case and justice. This has been Cold Case Grim Files. Never forget Susan Poupart. And never stop seeking the truth.